Hello guys, it's Airsick Hydra here, and today's video is on a very touchy subject. So before we get started, remember to like the video and don't click any other buttons following that. We're going to be first issuing a small message of reassurance to all of you, because every time we talk about PvP there is a little bit of a panic wave. Everyone hits the panic alarm because they feel that the development of the game has suddenly been put on pause to create PvP. But I would reassure you that technically all you have to do to make PvP from a development side is to take one tile that has already been created, cut the walls off, which is incredibly simple, and then enable player damage. Then the development staff can actually get on with their jobs and carry on making other stuff. And this has already been made, so really the development side of things hasn't been put on pause in any way, shape or form. Now all that we have are some staff testing the feature internally, providing feedback and a bit of guidance as to how to balance it. The development of the rest of the features on the massive roadmap hasn't been put on pause. There is no real reason that the PvE is going to suffer, because those guys that are making animations, graphics, new maps, new tile sets, they're not all currently doing PvP. There's nothing for them to do. Once it goes into testing with us as well, there will be probably nothing being done on PvP other than minor weapon modifications, so do not panic. And as well as that, guys, a small disclaimer, and feel free to disagree with me if you like, but I do feel that at least my role as an alpha tester is to say and comment on if features are good or bad, if I like them or dislike them, but I don't really feel it's within my personal boundaries to say remove a piece of the game because I personally don't want to play it, irrespective of if it's good or bad. Now, some of you will dislike that comment, but guys, do respect that there are players out there who may enjoy the feature, and ARPGs have had a long history of PvPers enjoying the game. In Diablo 2 it was a thriving community, it didn't ruin the game in any way, and in Diablo 3 they done really fucked up. And that's the first topic to talk about today. PvP within Diablo 3 and why it could never work, and what lessons we can learn from this, because I do think Inquisitor Martyr needs to take some of this stuff on board. So here we go, a list of why D3 would never work with PvP. So the first one is that all of the builds' damage values were hugely spread. So some builds would do 10 million hits, this is at end game obviously, some would do hundreds of millions in terms of damage per second. Some would have absolutely no damage but be incredibly survivable, and then you would have the polar opposite to that. This is, or was rather, a huge issue because you simply had players one-shotting each other constantly, and they never really had any means of balancing and narrowing down this damage spread. We'll move on to the other features and then we'll talk about Inquisitor afterwards. Now, the next major problem is that the abilities were so customizable. There were so many combinations, literally thousands of abilities, that it makes balance near enough impossible. By changing one move in one build that's slightly overpowered, you break other builds, and this is where players get the impression that balancing PvP breaks the game, because balancing one build has an effect on other builds. And yes, in Diablo there's thousands of them, so there is a lot of potential here for them to screw stuff up. And then you also have the effect that everything was a lot faster paced, action orientated. You could blink from one side of the screen to the other, so for certain classes things were always going to be really difficult. If you were against someone that could literally blink and automatically hit you from the other side of the map without you having a chance to react, well, of course that's never going to be something that you're able to balance, because people are just backflipping and sidestepping and doing cartwheels all over the place. It was just a bit of a visual mess. And lastly, something that I feel never really helped the PvP in the game, and it's more of a minor thing, but during the combat for Diablo 3 is your eyes were normally focused on your player during combat. There were hordes of enemies around you in PvE. You were normally looking at your character and your glitzy animations dancing around the stream, or the screen rather, and you never really focused so much on who you're fighting against, and if you did, it's normally at the expense of not looking at your own health. And that was a little bit of a drawback in PvP, because you often lost track of what was going on too quickly, and things just, well, bleh, you fell over and died. So in contrast though, where Diablo 3 had huge damage values that were really widely spread, Inquisitor Martyr, you may have noticed, all of the weapons are within about 20% damage of each other as a base value. The abilities vary a little bit more from side to side, but it's a very narrow spread, and even if you take into sort of build consideration. You might go up 40% damage, or you might go up 40% mitigation, but it's a very tight grouping in terms of damage, so it's a completely different damage set. And then if you look at the build quantities of being in the thousands with Diablo 3, we've actually only got weapon abilities within Martyr which aren't customizable. Yes, you can put them in different armor, but really that's not going to break a build particularly. So this is really easy to control. If one thing's overperforming, you can nerf it slightly and it won't be to the detriment of anything else. So they're not going to be breaking the game because they removed a little bit of the slow value on one particular ability. It's going to be incredibly easy in comparison to balance these weapons. And then you obviously have the fast-paced action combat of D3, as we mentioned, versus the traditional, the slow standard approach of Inquisitor Martyr that's going to be easier for players to keep a track of visually. It's going to be a pace very much familiar to anyone that's probably played a MOBA, where you're in slow control of your character. Yes, if you're squishy you might die in a couple of seconds, but it's not going to be over in a split second because you didn't press the right button in the right particular moment. Nothing's going to be quite that lightning fast. It's going to be a little bit more accessible to people. And then in Inquisitor Martyr as well, I do feel that you're free to look at the opponents a little bit more just due to, well, the way the combat works, the way the animations work. I feel your eyes as a player are free to look around a little bit more. That might be something due to the pace of the game. So straight away, the differences between Diablo 3's PvP and why it couldn't work, actually I don't feel you can make any of those arguments to Inquisitor Martyr and say, well, ARPGs don't work for PvP. Inquisitor Martyr doesn't have any of the drawbacks that Diablo 3 did. However, there are some other things really important to learn from previous fuck-ups. One of the main ones, and this is actually from MMOs, but something that really made players quite salty, was when they introduced gear that was slightly better, and this was by accident within World of Warcraft. They had sort of critical hit on some of the braces, so if you wanted to min-max damage you had to do PvP. It would get you something like an extra 2 to 5% damage per second, which was a noticeable amount in raids that had damage checks. So if you are going to ever introduce any loot from a PvP, it needs to be equal to at the very most, and you need to have a tight grip on stats. If they're randomized, which is the nature of an ARPG, it's really not a problem. I personally don't see the issue with getting, or rather grinding, a purple piece of gear from doing enough items, enough PvP. As long as it's randomized, it's the same as you'd get from anything else playing the game. I personally don't see the issue with that, but if they go down the route of not giving you anything, or yep, that's absolutely fine too. Now, something else to take into account with the other ARPGs and where they done screwed up is that they did make arena-based combat, and what we know from MMOs that have had arena-based combat for a long time is the more directly confrontational, more skill-focused direct PvP does attract more elitist players, a little bit of a bad attitude, a bit more try-hard. It's much more alienating for the casual player. But that is pretty much unique to the arenas. If you take Battlegrounds and objective-focused combat, people loved the Alterac Valley within World of Warcraft. Even if they hated PvP, most people like playing that. Now, obviously, Inquisitor Martyr is not going to go that far into making a vast open PvE PvP thing, but they have said they're going to do something, a control game similar to Domination-ish with some differences. Having these battleground effects is a really good move. It's a really good move because it takes the emphasis away from skill. You can even introduce a couple elements of luck or randomness, or simply by saying, hey, if you focus on the objectives more than the other guy, even if he's better than you, you may still win. That's a really smart move they've made, and it's not something that's really been done in an ARPG yet, but you've only got to look at MOBAs and how the casual player in a MOBA normally really likes the game modes that involve objectives, whereas if you put them on the casual conquests or main confrontational arenas, they really don't like it. So this is something I feel that they're moving in the right direction with, and I feel that they should keep on board that if they just have a dueling arena, it probably will be not that popular with the vast majority of players. Now, I think that actually summarises a lot of the major concerns and things that go wrong. as a summary, I really do think Inquisitor Martyr's combat is going to be a pace maybe a bit more similar to that of a MOBA. Yes, it's not going to look the same, it's a top-down shooter, but I feel it's going to be a lot more easier to manage. A lot more easier, that's good English, isn't it? It's going to be a lot easier to manage than something like the lightning fast action combat of Diablo 3. And guys, do remember that there are plenty of players out there that will like this feature, and that there are advantages of having PvP in the game. It's not just some evil thing that will suck all of the developers' attention and ruin everything else. Per hour of development, and again, as I've said, there really is very little development in terms of PvP. The actual replayability, the amount of hours that players will put into a feature is huge. So it's a very smart investment from a developer's point of view. Even if they only get 1,000 players that stick with the game, playing PvP for the whole time, all they need to do is take a day to make a map every now and again, and those players will forever be happy. Then you've got to also take into account that players that wouldn't have been tempted by the game otherwise, maybe some of those let down by Diablo 3, may well say, oh, you know what, it's got PvP and I quite enjoy that, so maybe I'll look at buying this game. It may actually attract people into purchasing the game that may not have otherwise, which is something very important to consider. And again, it's a purely optional feature. It's never been discussed or mentioned as anything other than something optional. They've even, I think, said in the latest stream that there won't be any gear rewards, so really the only incentive to play it is if you like it. So really, I can't see the reasons to panic about it. The whole of the roadmap's still there, it's looking really vast, all of this amazing stuff's coming. I feel that the panic is a little bit overdone here, guys. The game's not going to be ruined because they took a few minutes out to make an extra feature. Yes, the balancing will take a while, fair enough, but really it's not going to be that complicated given that all of the weapons are pretty similar, all of the classes operate in a pretty similar way. Some up damages, minus damages, etc. Fine, that may take a little while to tweak out, but hey, let the people that are going to play PvP do the balancing. If you don't want to do it, don't play it. Absolutely fine. Guys, I hope you didn't dislike the video too much if you're one of the anti-PvPers, but I feel like I had to be honest in this conversation. I didn't want to pussyfoot about the subject. Hey guys, see what you think, have a great weekend, stay tuned for tomorrow's video. No idea what it's about yet, so see you then.